make sure that I introduced you to the most common and useful remote tools. I don't think there's a future where it won't be to your advantage to know about these tools, even if things shift back to quote unquote normal. There are components of these tools that we'll continue to use. So for example, in the Career Center office, some of our team were using some of these tools for projects. Now we're all using these tools. There's no way we're not going to use these tools when we get back to the office. I think that applicant tracking systems are going to be prioritizing looking for people with some of these skills. So I don't have all the in-depth knowledge of some of the programs, but I'll talk about my experience with some of these tools. And what I've done in this presentation, which is why I'll send it out to you, is I've also included for each one of these categories a really great link to a YouTube video that does a quick outline of some of the tools that we're going to be discussing today. So I broke it down into a couple of categories. We're going to start with cloud computing tools. Then we're going to talk about real-time communication tools. Then we'll get into some project management tracking tools, video conferencing tools like the one we're using right now, and then content management systems. And now I added that it's not explicitly a remote technology tool, but I think it's a growing in-demand tool. I'm sure, as you guys know, as we're trapped inside, we're consuming a lot of content. We're basically mining content for our jobs, for our lives, for everything. So I think it's going to be an increasingly, and has become an increasingly important set of tools to talk about. And I'll walk you through what those are. So in terms of cloud computing, the reason I'm starting with that is because in December of 2019, LinkedIn did a study and found that it is the second most in-demand skill. And if you Google LinkedIn 2020 skills, you'll see that full list. The first one is blockchain, I believe, which is obviously like a very technical specific skill, but cloud computing is a skill that I think every person should be dipping into. Now there's a couple different kinds of cloud computing, and we'll talk about that, but really it just refers to any kind of hosted service delivered over the internet. So the most common one that I've used for the last, I'm going to guess at least 8 years, is Google Drive. And Google Suite and all of those tools. So basically, rather than your files living on your desktop, they live in a server in the cloud somewhere. And so I'm really going to be brief on these types of cloud computing. The one you're going to really be interested in, unless you're a super technical person, is the SaaS version of these tools, which is software as a service. This is Dropbox, Google Suite, and Salesforce, which is also sometimes classified as like a customer relationship management tool, a CRM. But most of these are free. They require a login. So Google Suite, obviously you have to have a Gmail account to use that tool. Dropbox is a different story. You can have a Gmail or any other kind of email to do that. They don't require any hardware. The applications themselves live in the cloud, meaning that you're going to log in and just work in a browser. You don't need to download it. If you download anything, you're going to download the apps. If I were working with anyone who didn't have Google Suite on their resume, my advice would be get yourself a Gmail account and build some knowledge around the Google Suite, because it's increasingly common. Dropbox, you're going to see, I mean, that's a skill that everyone needs to have. But it doesn't have the set of functions that Google Suite has. So I think applicant tracking systems would more likely be looking for Salesforce. But you'll see that when you're out in the world looking, maybe you're considering a new job, maybe you're considering just keeping your eyes open, you will see Salesforce and Google Suite and those things appear in qualifications. Now, the next two types of cloud computing are really more for developers or people who are on the technology side. I'm only mentioning them so I don't give you an incomplete picture of cloud computing, but unless you have deep technical skills, I wouldn't dip into Windows, Azure, or Google App Engine. They're really more for people who have some kind of programming or development background. But the platform as a service supports applications and the updating applications and development tools around those applications, so customizing those. The third type, let's see if I can make that move, is the infrastructure as a service, which is even more technical, where you can design an application within this platform. So these examples here, when preparing this presentation, I have never used any of these tools. And I just wanted you to have a complete picture of what cloud computing means. But really the first slide that we talked about with Google Suite, and even a lot of the Microsoft Office cloud tools are the ones that I would focus on learning about. And they're the most common. So if you have not used Google Drive, if you have not used Microsoft Office Cloud 365 or whatever, then there's a couple ways to upskill. Honestly, YouTube has a lot. What I love about a YouTube search on this topic is that there's a 2-minute video, there's a 1-hour video, there's an 8-hour video. It's a really fabulous resource. And there's all kinds of different kinds of people delivering this information. So there are people presenting about cloud computing for retail. There's people presenting about cloud computing for designers or creatives. So what I love about it is it can really be tailored. And of course, the content is free. There's also going to increasingly be a ton of webinars that professional associations and other groups put on, kind of like DePaul's going to be doing a lot of these workshops, because we're all responding to the fact that everything's being delivered, virtually like this. And then product demos, like Google wants to teach you how to use Google Drive. So there are plenty of resources that those products are making themselves to support your learning of those tools. There's also a really interesting digital fitness app by PwC, sorry, I forget the full name, but they have a digital fitness app that I've downloaded recently that's really interesting in that it tests you in your digital knowledge and then it gives you tasks to grow your skills. So that's something to look into. It is a mobile app, so you'd have to install it on a mobile device. Udemy and Coursera, a lot of these other free online learning platforms or MOOCs also have courses, most of which are free around some of these tools. Frankly, libraries host workshops on this. Back when we returned into the real world, rec centers and community colleges have courses, and like our park district offers courses on stuff like this as well. And then you can just dip in and try it yourself. I mean, I really do think that's the best way to upskill, is to really do a little bit of looking and research and then go in there and try and make some things. We have a couple recommended LinkedIn Learning courses specifically around cloud computing. You can see one is really the core concepts. The other one gets into those more technical tools that are more development oriented. And like I said, LinkedIn Learning is free to any current DePaul student. You have to log in through DePaul's LinkedIn Learning or Campus Connect platform. So unfortunately, because I'm full screen on this, I'm not seeing questions. So I'm gonna just take a pause and ask if anybody has a question right now. If so, you can just unmute and ask it.
I'm sorry, just so I make sure, my name is Antoinette, make sure I understand you. We can enroll in free courses through LinkedIn Learning courses offered through DePaul, or? If
you're a current student, what I can do is I will follow up with this to everyone who RSVP'd for this event with the recording of this lecture, and I'll also include the link that takes you to the Campus Connect login for LinkedIn Learning.
Okay, and if you're not a student anymore?
Yeah, if you're not a student anymore, I believe you can do the premium free trial on LinkedIn to get access to it. But the other thing is, and as you'll see, LinkedIn Learning is great, but especially around the topics I'll be covering, there's plenty of other free versions of this kind of training all over the place on YouTube and everywhere else. All right, so we're gonna go to the next one. I'm not gonna go to this because we have a lot to cover, but when I send you this presentation, this link will be active. This is just a 2.5 minute intro to cloud computing. And I very specifically selected YouTube videos that I thought kind of did a good job of presenting some basic information. Most of them are very short. There's one that's a little bit longer, but I think it actually goes really in depth. All right, so then we'll talk about real-time communication tools. There's a lot of options you can see here already. Basically what we're talking about is a tool that helps you chat, a replacement for email. And it doesn't replace every email communication, but it has the benefits of being real-time and instant. And what I'll say is the way it's different from texting on a mobile device is that it offers an organized experience for the whole team. So instead of, like when you think about a group text situation, You see, things are popping up. People aren't seeing what everybody's seeing at the same time. It's all in this like weird linear space, even when it's kind of crossing. What these tools do, and I'll show you Slack, these tools provide threads, direct messages, and they create a really organic way to have a conversation that will make you never want to send an email again. Most of these have free versions. You can see Slack is the most popular right now. That being said, there's a lot of companies that are going for their business. So Twist, Flock, Discord, which includes like a voice chat function. Most of these also have, let me see, I think of the next slide. They typically combine they combine channels. So you can see here in this sample, there's a channel for the design team. Maybe only the people involved in design are on this channel. There's a social media channel. Only the social media people are on the channel. Help desk, that's IT. There might be a general channel that everybody's on. And what's great about that is I identify who's on the channel and I send them a single thing like, don't forget about this. And now I know that it's gone to the right people. But they also have direct messaging in them as well, which is nice to have that in the same space. Like as soon as I get to my desk, I open Slack. I'm in Slack all day. It's just one of the tabs that I have open, and I have notifications set up so that I get a ding when there's a quick question. I'm not drafting an email every time there's a fast question. But there are things that should be in email, not in Slack. They also have phone and video calls. So right now, whenever I have a one-on-one conversation with anybody on my team, I do a Slack call because I'm in Slack. And that's a benefit of a tool like this, is you're in it all the time. I mean, unfortunately for me, I'm in it until 8 at night sometimes, but it's all in one place. Now, most of these have a free version. Slack, the Career Center is using Slack's free version right now, and it's working great for us. The only drawback about a free version is you lose your archive. So after so many messages are sent, it stops saving them. And it does limit group calls. So I can only do one-on-one calls because I'm in the free version. This is the way to learn this tool is the same as anything else. You could literally dip in it and create an account right now. I tested it and I created an account for my family. And I made my sons and my husband members. They're not going to use it, but I was just testing to see how easy that was. So if you are involved in any kind of a group, I know someone who's testing this and learning this tool with a group of people she works with around a book club. Any kind of group where this kind of organic communication is useful is a great place to test it. There's a lot of tricks and tips and things you can do in these tools that I'm not going to get into. But I would say if you're applying to a job in 2020, you're going to want one of those tools on there. If I saw Flock on there and I knew that that was a substitute for Slack, then I know you know how to do Slack, because they're similar enough products that once you know one, the other, you know the other. The only one that's, well, there's a couple that are a little different. Microsoft Teams is part of the Microsoft suite, so it integrates Word docs and things like that in there. And Google Chat, of course, which is actually starting to look more like Skype, Slack. Google Chat, of course, integrates as well. But when we're using Slack, you can integrate other platforms into it. So we use, and we'll get into this project management tool later, we integrate Slack, Asana, and Google Docs and Google Docs representing the cloud computing, Slack representing the immediate communication tool, and then Asana representing the project management tool that I'll preview for you. So like I said, you can upskill with any group of people. There's 2 really great LinkedIn learning courses about this, but there's also this 20-minute video that I'm linking you guys to, where this guy goes through Slack from a beginner to advanced, and it would introduce you to a lot of those tools. Any questions about this, the concept of what a real-time communication tool is? No? I'll never go back to life before Slack, I can tell you that. If you work with a group, any one of these tools would really change how quickly you can work. Particularly, in our office, we use Outlook for our email. And for me, Outlook is just one of the most labor intensive email tools. All right, let's get really fun though. Let's dip into project management. Now, Slack, it's kind of hard to separate these out, right? Because the communication tool helps you manage projects, right? Because you can dip in and ask questions. You can have a thread that's specific to a project, which we definitely do. But the project management tools are used to help you plan the process, right? To track the project as it moves across. What I love about most of these tools is they typically have a really, I would say, immediate visual representation of a project. And I will show you our Asana board just so you can get a sense of that. But they allow you to create boards, and we put that in quotes because it's obviously really just, I don't know how to say it other than saying boards. It's really just a space where you can put the parts of a project, or you can put the order of a project, and then you can physically move a task through those parts or through those tasks until it's complete. And you can assign team members. So our notifications are set up so that if I have a document to review, somebody assigns me, I get a notification in my email or in Slack that I need to review it. I get in there, I review, I then assign it back to them, and it moves along through a process. There's no job where project management isn't going to be more important. One of the reasons is the role of secretary doesn't really exist anymore. We're all kind of our own admins. So I think that this piece is a really important skill, and we are doing more collaborative work. So you can see how project management, and particularly using a tool to manage project management, is going to be really important in a remote space. Let's go into the next one, and then if we don't have a good, okay, we'll talk about some options, but then I'll show you the Career Center's Asana board. This is in no order of preference. Basecamp provides project management. Asana is the tool that we use. It is great for larger teams. Our team, we have on our Asana, I think we have about 30 folks on there. But you could use Asana with a group of 3. Mondays, Trello, they all actually look very similar. So if you're curious and one is cheaper and one has a longer free trial or whatever, we used the free Asana, which isn't a trial, but is a version. We used the free Asana for, I think, over a year before we decided to do the paid Asana, and it's really just because of the numbers. The major challenge of the free Asana is I think you're limited to 11 people on a single team or something like that, so it depends on what you're doing. But like I said, Asana, Mondays, and Trello, they used to look more different. They're looking more similar all the time. Wrike is a little bit different because it has a better integration of videos or graphics, but right now we use Asana for even our graphic work. This is a YouTube video we're not going to get into, but I am going to dip out and preview our Asana because I realize I don't have a slide of what that looks like, and I'll just show you what it looks like. Yes, I see that note, replaces text and emails. It really, Slack and those other communication tools very much replace, I would say I send maybe 1/8 of the emails I used to send, which is great. Because then I get an answer or I don't get an answer. Okay, so this looks like a lot, right? There's a lot of projects on here. I'm going to take you into the project I think makes the most sense. Okay, so this one's kind of simple. This is a board we used, and when you create a board in, you can use Windows Team for project management. Yes, you certainly can. And Windows Team kind of crosses over. It's both a cloud and communication and project management tool. Our office has opted not to use it because we're doing a lot of stuff in Google. Frankly, most of our writing and content development is in Google. So for us, it wasn't a huge advantage. But if you're working exclusively in Office and in Word, Windows Team is definitely something to look for. I don't quite know about free versions or paid versions of that. So that's the caveat of some of this is you really want to look into what gatekeeping happens once you pay or don't pay. So this board was set up. I always view in board view because I think it's more attractive. You can view in list view, which is to-dos versus all these sections. If I wanted to make a board, I could, all right, got it. I could add a column here right here, and then say, you know what, I think this should be, I'm just going to put test so that my colleagues don't think I'm a real jerk for messing up their board. I can then move this column and say, this is a step in the process I want to be here. And then when I'm ready to move something, like I'll just do a new one, another test. I can get in here. I just create a tile, which is for me really nice. I'm a super visual learner. I can assign the tile to myself. I can link to a Google Doc or something else. I can put anything here. I can add this. So now I've assigned it to me. I don't have a due date, but let's put a due date in here, the 19th. And I can set it up so I get reminders. But when I'm done, I can move this to in review and then assign it to someone else from the list of people I'm working with, or I can mark complete up here and then it's done. So it's definitely, depending on your project, if your project has stages like this, it's a really good tool. If your project doesn't have stages, but it's more tracking what's the activity that's actually happening, you can see that a lot of these other boards are organized. Yeah, they're organized in stages. Let me see if I can find one that's not. There's definitely ones that are less organized by stage and more organized by task. Let's see if this one is. Board. Yeah, they're just collecting some of the projects here in these columns. It's not do this and then this, it's just collecting some of the work they're doing. And it might, rather than going horizontally, it might go vertically down as far as like, I did this, then I did this, then I did this. Any questions about what this view looks like or about why you would use a project management tool? All right. Feel free to come back to it. Like I said, all these, I will send you the links, and these YouTube videos are actually pretty great. Let's get in here. Let me hide this over here. Sorry, I've got so many windows. We're just gonna go back into this full view, and then we'll dip out if we have more things to look at. All right, video conferencing tools. This is the one that you guys are probably the most familiar with already if you've been attending any webinars. It's really important now that we're all working remotely to have knowledge of these tools and to be using them correctly. So we have some tips for sure. There's every kind of tool. Zoom has been criticized recently for security settings. We are continuing to use Zoom at DePaul. We certainly are trying to follow all the best practices. The benefit of Zoom is that you don't have to be logged in any way. I can set it so that I don't have any registration. I can set it so that you can just click into it in a browser. But there's plenty of other great options. If you're a Google heavy institution, Google Meet is something that we were using a lot amongst the team because we are using the Google Suite so much. I'm constantly attending webinars that are using GoToMeeting, and again, Microsoft Teams is also has video conferencing as part of it as well. And there is like not a career center, an enrollment management like happy hour that happens on Microsoft Teams every week. BlueJeans is another tool that delivers a similar product. All of these have different levels of paid versus non-paid. DePaul provides our Zoom, but you can also have a personal Zoom as well. But there are things that they offer like integrations and other services that they offer that you have to pay for. Most offer recording options, and some offer interactivity like polls or chat. And that's kind of how they differentiate themselves. I think right now the world is looking at Zoom more than they are at the other tools, but all of these work well. So if you have better familiarity with Microsoft, if you have better familiarity with Google, you don't have to teach yourself a new thing. That being said, there's a ton of support for all of these tools. And for example, like I dipped into BlueJeans meetings today, and they have webinars that you could just view to learn more about the product and to actually learn the product. I see a question, I see a hand raise. I never see that because I can only see so many. What's your question? You can go ahead and unmute if you like. I don't have a view of the chat. Bring it back up. Would you agree that Asana would be good for signature processing documents? Interesting. I mean, DocuSign is the go-to, right? And in fact, they're hiring right now a lot because they are kind of one of the bigger businesses in that space. Well, not kind of, they definitely are. So the only question I would ask in terms of Asana and signature processing is some of the security stuff. I mean, we're using it for content development. We're not thinking about security in any way. You do have to have a login to use it. You do have to be invited. So I would want to dip into how they label themselves as, how they position themselves in that market. But I know that DocuSign, I only know this because I worked with an alum yesterday on an application to DocuSign, and I was like, oh, of course, this is a really growing space for this platform. And I almost added them, but they're just so specific to a certain function that I didn't put them in this presentation. But I would definitely look. Are they usually used by universities or corporations? So I'm going to say there's a good mix. I worked at every institution before DePaul was a Google institution because google.edu is such a robust product. So we used a lot of homegrown Google products, but we used a lot of other products as well. And I worked in places where there's a lot of Adobe use as well. I would say if your institution is a Microsoft institution like DePaul is, they're going to use Teams. I think we're one of the few people who aren't using Teams because we ended up using Google Drive, which is now a product that DePaul allows staff and faculty to use. So it kind of depends on how these things integrate with each other. Asana and if are they usually used by universities or corporation refers to any of these products at all. In the last couple years, and particularly in the last couple months, I don't think there's a single business that's not using some of these tools. You do not need to list every specific tool. That's a great question. You do want to really be attentive to what the job posting has in terms of preferred experience with, but you want an example of each one. Because if it's not in the applicant tracking system, it's probably in the hiring manager or the HR screener's mind to look for, have they used this or have they not? Particularly, I will say this for myself, the older I get, the more I really sweat over what technology I put on my resume, because there's a real bias and a real assumption about my knowledge as I age in my profession. There are assumptions about what I know how to do technologically. So I'm very attentive to the technology section on my resume and making sure I have the most up-to-date tools on there. And if I have Asana and I don't have Trello, that's fine. Unless they say in the job posting, very specifically, we use Salesforce or preference for Salesforce, something like that. The other thing about putting it on your resume is you're not saying you're an expert. You're saying you have knowledge of it. If you have confidence in yourself that you could use a tool if it's being applied, then put it on your resume. If they want you to be an expert, they're going to tell you they want you to be an expert, then they're either going to require a skills test or a portfolio. And our whole goal with resumes is to get an interview. And once in that interview, you can provide context and be confident about your skills in learning new tools. And I think this will be especially important when we talk about content management systems. So let's get in here. I don't want to make this, sorry, I got to make it a little smaller because we're going to move through this. Let's see what the next one is. Great YouTube video. I hate that I can't show you these because they're actually really succinct and awesome, but I just don't want to run out of time. All right, let's talk about content management systems. What a fancy word for basically websites. Really, the reason I would recommend dipping into one of these is that content is king. Oh, good point about Skype. Sorry, I see this question about Skype. It is not considered old or surpassed for remote conferences. It is definitely still relevant. It's not included on here for me because Skype, its biggest challenge is it requires a login. Meaning I can't, and you got to know the person's username to invite them. So for a lot of businesses, there's so many barriers to that communication. But if it's a Skype institution where they're like really integrating that product into everything they do, we had Skype for Business at DePaul and we stopped using it because I think we shifted to Teams for some of that function. And Skype for Business, the other piece is we were trying to use it for student advising, but Skype for Business is not the same. Your login and your profile are not the same as regular Skype. So now we're like, well, why would we be using Skype for Business if our students aren't on that? They're on Skype, and then they have to tell us their Skype username instead of just their email. So for us, there are a lot of barriers. I think Skype could be positioned to fix some of those things. And I know like my husband's team is using Skype. So there are definitely people who are using it, and it is not considered old. It's just got a couple things. There's just a couple reasons we weren't using it, but that's great to bring it up. I meant to include that in there on the list just because it's one of it really kind of started a lot of this. And hopefully, or maybe they'll switch it up a little bit so it's a little less labor intensive for users, and maybe they already have. Okay, so CMSs, or content management systems, are basically the back end of any website in terms of where things go, editing the text. They're not the same as editing HTML. So if you're anywhere near my age, you might remember going into a product like BB Edit or something like that and designing a website by typing in HTML. What has happened is that content management systems have emerged that make that process more of a drag and drop, make that process kind of more menu driven. So instead of writing code or using tags, in most of these CMSs, I have a couple templates I can choose from, and then I plop things in and out by selecting them from a menu or dragging and dropping. Getting access to these tools can vary a lot. So I'll have a very specific, I have a list in the next slide of what some of these are. So they range. Drupal is a tool I've used at a university. That was it's kind of like it's a web design tool, but you're not really designing, you're just moving content around. And it is very user friendly in terms of you don't need to know HTML to use it. It doesn't hurt to understand HTML as a concept, but it was designed so that administrators could actually manage the content of their own websites without being developers or coders. I have never used Joomla or Magento or Modex. These are all going to vary in terms of what industries use them and how difficult or easy they are to learn. Squarespace is one I'm sure most of you have heard of because they obviously spend the most money as far as advertising, or they used to. Squarespace and Wix and Weebly are all very similar in that as a user of any of those tools, you would choose a template and drag and drop to design content for a website. They're very, very easy tools to use and to learn. Wix in particular, now Squarespace, you can build something for free, but you can't publish it for free. You have to pay. It's a monthly subscription. Wix has recently, in the last several years, has really improved their templates. It used to be that Squarespace had the most sophisticated templates, but Wix has actually pretty good templates right now. And there's a free version that has like a little ad on it, but I definitely recommend Wix if you're going to dip into this at all. WordPress is just a little bit different. It's has more, you can do more with it than you can with Squarespace or Wix, but there's a bit more of a learning curve. That being said, that's a good thing to learn. So if you dipped into WordPress and you're like, oh, I can't handle this, like it's more developer than I want to be, then dip into Wix and you're going to find it a little bit easier. PeopleSoft. Is PeopleSoft a CMS? This is such an interesting question. Oh, is PeopleSoft a CMS? I feel like PeopleSoft is kind of an everything. It predates all of these CMSs, and it is not a skill that I think, it's definitely, if you're in higher ed, it's a good skill to have. It is a very difficult skill to acquire. And it is also the least user-friendly thing on the planet, and I hope will be replaced by something else at some point in time. That being said, if I'm working with someone who's interested in a role that involves PeopleSoft, I often recommend to them because it is it's an older tool that hasn't necessarily been updated as much as I think other tools could be updated. There's a lot of great technical support for it on the internet. So when I don't know how to do something in PeopleSoft, I Google how to da-da-da in PeopleSoft. And every university, so many universities use it. Every university has a lot of support documentation for it. So if you were applying to a role where PeopleSoft was a skill, a recommended skill, you could dip in that way by dipping into some of those support documents. But I'll look into that. I'll look into whether or not it counts as a CMS. At DePaul, we use it for course schedules, for course scheduling. I mean, that goes way beyond what a typical CMS would do. It's just like so I don't know what I would name that tool, but I'll look into it. That's a good question. So if you wanted to practice a skill for a content management system, the easiest thing to do would be a personal website. Make a personal website where you can throw your social medias together. Like LinkedIn is great. LinkedIn is very necessary. LinkedIn is the king of like digital networking right now, but you can enhance it with a personal website that would include, that would link your social medias together. Because right now on LinkedIn, your Twitter handle's not there. Everything else isn't necessarily there. So a personal website, even if you don't end up sharing it, I think would be an interesting way to dip into some of the skills associated with the content management system. I don't think Drupal, there's not a free version of that I know. We use a DePaul SharePoint, which is a different CMS, very similar to Drupal, but significantly less user-friendly. But there's a lot of these options. Even knowing what a CMS is going to be to your benefit. Again, great video introducing some varied CMSs to you. I don't think it focuses on one, but there's a ton of support for tools like Wix and Weebly and Squarespace and all of that. The final slide is just a reminder that we're here to help you. I kind of talked about some of our services. It looks like I've left a little bit of time. I'm going to stop my screen share. Oh, I know. I want to show you one more thing. I'm sorry, I lied. There's one more really fabulous thing I wanted to show you. Let me dip out of my presentation after that opens back up. Where did it go? Sorry, now it disappeared. Let's see what we got here. My window totally disappeared. That's fine. I'll open up a new one. And we'll go to Chrome. Great. Escape. This is a tool that I have been advertising to every group I talk to. So we talked about having the skills you need and having some of these on your resume. This is a resume optimizer offered by MC. I will throw the link into the chat in just a minute. It mimics applicant tracking systems. So I copied and pasted my resume into this document, just copied and pasted directly from a doc. What I love about it is if you don't choose a role, it underlines and tells you every skill it found, every single skill. So you can see it's highlighted all of these. If I pick a role, I'm going to pick a different role here. Let's do, communications analyst. So you would pick a role. It tells you how many of the key skills you have, how many other relevant skills you have, and then what skills you need to add so that your resume is competitive. Like as a great example, SQL. I could dip into LinkedIn Learning, do an hour-long course on SQL, depending on how challenging it is or my own abilities. Maybe it would end up being on my resume in my technology section, which is down here. So I think this is what I love about this. So we can talk all the time about it's valuable to know remote tools. It's valuable to know this. But then what do you do with it? You get it on your resume and you make sure that it is doing the job it needs to do, which is getting that recruiter or hiring manager to go to the next step of the process, whether or not that's reading your cover letter or if that's an interview. That's the key to the resume, is making sure that it does its job. And its job is largely skill oriented, at least in terms of the robots. Like the 30% of resumes that are submitted for jobs even get looked at. And it's because the robots are kicking out the 70% who don't have the skills that they're told to look for. So I'm obsessed with this tool. I think it's really great. This company is a data company, and they scrape both job postings and LinkedIn profiles to make this accurate. And it's updated daily in terms of like they're scraping the most contemporary data. So I love it. I think everybody should know about it. I'm going to throw that link in the chat. The links that I didn't show us. Oh, of course, I'm going to follow up to everyone tonight with the recording of this. Well, hopefully they'll have the recording, but at the very least, I'll send you the whole slide deck, and the slide deck will have the links active in the PDF. So if you can open a PDF, it'll work for you. I can throw them in there though while I answer questions too. Any more questions in the chat or anywhere while we're here? Here's the first one. That's cloud computing. Oh, I don't want to copy all of that. And if you haven't used Canva, this Canva, no, MC is free. They just made it available because of COVID for everyone. You don't need a login. You don't need to do anything. They also have a very cool, weird tool called, I'm going to go straight to skills. They have a fill your skill gaps tool that I've played with a little bit, but you answer a bunch of questions and then it tells you where you might use your skills in terms of other industries. And it tells you about, it also links you to like current job postings and things like that. So I think they're a company to watch. I think they're going to be doing a lot of great stuff. And particularly because all of their stuff is free. I think they're going to get in the business of skill building. So I think they're going to be a competitor with LinkedIn Learning, unless they sell it directly to the higher education market. But that resume optimizer, when I used it for myself, I was like, oh, wow, there's like 8 things I'm missing on my resume, and I'm advising people all day, every day on this. So I'll throw this one in. Sorry, I knew there'd be a baby. Yeah, but Willie, you and I can do it later. All right. Any other questions or anything else we can cover here? I'm going to stop sharing now. No other questions or anything?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can.
Yes, I just have a question about using these tools and putting them on the resume. Mm-hmm. Like, should we also get like certifications like within using these tools, or should just putting them on the resume and like being self-taught with these tools should be sufficient?
Yeah, I think in most cases you don't need certification. There are opportunities to get badging or certification. So for example, on LinkedIn Learning, they have some of these skills that are badged, but typically these kinds of tools are not really the ones that you would need to be badged or certified for, because they are relatively entry-level products, and some of them are relatively new. So I would say if you have the chance to use it and you feel like this is a tool you understand, put it on the resume. You're not putting next to it expert. You're just putting knowledge of this. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem. The presentation next week is on Handshake. It will probably also be advertised in Newsline. So if you don't have a Handshake account that's active, I'm going to throw a link in here for you to request an active Handshake account. That's really the only reason I'm saying that is, number one, we actually have a lot of recruiters on Handshake who are, I got to put it into Paul, sorry, who are reaching out to students and recruiting from that space. But the other thing is that's where all of our events are housed. So you would definitely be able to dip in there, and we do communicate via Handshake. We send a lot of emails to folks who are in Handshake. Where is that Handshake thing? I think it is the, Handshake account request form. Yes, so this is also for alumni. And boop. So yeah, that event is next Thursday. I think it's let me actually tell you. I can open my calendar if I didn't close that tab. I think I did close that tab. Is Handshake open? No, I think it's at 3 o'clock. I'm not quite sure, but it's job search during the pandemic. What I can do is I will also attach that presentation when I follow up, because that's already made. And really it focuses on following demand. And if anyone here has a humanities background, you're probably used to that. You probably followed demand your whole career and found yourself in positions that use the skills that you built in a lot of different ways. But yeah, there's a couple other tips in there around networking and things like that. Any other questions? That Google Doc link I just sent you is how to request a Handshake account if you don't have one that's active. And I'll also be sending an event survey for you guys as well with the follow-up email. All right, if you don't have any other questions, I'm just gonna hang out here to see if anybody has another one. I will follow up sharing everything we discussed today, and these links will hopefully work for you in the PDF, and if they don't, grab them from the chat here before you go. And you can actually download the chat. It's not a very beautiful file, but if you click on the little ... and save chat, it saves to your desktop. So all the links that we talked about would be in that file. I'm so shocked we didn't get a big interruption. I thought we'd have a dog barking or something. This has worked out better than I expected. Wonderful. I love working with alum. You guys always say thank you. All right, it looks like there's no other questions. You guys have a great night, and I hope you connect with the Career Center. Bye.